She thought she had everything: a loving husband, beautiful kids, and a perfect life. But in a cruel twist of fate, her husband abandoned her for the nanny, leaving her in the cold, devastated. 9 years later, she walked into his office with two surprises that would change everything. What happened next left him speechless and redefined everything she once believed about revenge and redemption. She had spent years rebuilding her life, piece by piece, after the man she had once trusted with everything, the man she had married, had abandoned her. It wasn't just the emotional devastation that stung, but the betrayal, the crushing realization that he had chosen someone else, his nanny, over the life they had built together. At first, she couldn't bring herself to believe it. He was the man who had promised to love her for better or worse, through thick and thin. But it didn't take long for reality to settle in. Her world, once filled with love and laughter, had crumbled in front of her eyes. He'd left, taking everything they had worked for, and worse, he had left her to pick up the pieces, alone. She couldn't understand how it had all unraveled so quickly. One moment, they were planning their future, and the next, he was making excuses about needing space and falling out of love. She had tried so hard to make things work after the affair was exposed. She had tried to understand, to forgive, to make their family whole again, but in the end, he had made his choice. He moved on with the nanny, and she, devastated and heartbroken, was left to rebuild her life from the ground up. The pain was unbearable at first, but with time, something shifted inside her. She became stronger, more focused. For the sake of their children and for her own future, she needed to rise above it all. 9 years had passed since that day when he walked away, and in those 9 years she had done what she promised herself. She healed, she built a life without him, and she thrived. She got her career back on track, focusing on her passion and turning it into something bigger than she had ever imagined. But despite everything, there were moments, late at night, when she would wonder what could have been. She never reached out to him. She never tried to seek closure. She just kept going, making sure her kids grew up in a home filled with love and opportunity. But life had a strange way of throwing curveballs, and this one was no different. Her ex-husband had done well for himself, really well. He built a business empire, one that had flourished in the years they had been apart. He had everything he had ever wanted, or so it seemed. But her life had also changed in ways he couldn't imagine. The truth was, she had moved on. She wasn't the same person who had been heartbroken and lost all those years ago. She was stronger, more determined, and perhaps even more successful than he had ever given her credit for. It was a regular Thursday morning when her phone buzzed with an unexpected notification, a news article about his company. She glanced at the headline, half reading, half laughing at the irony. Ex-husband's business is now a global leader. A part of her wanted to click away, but something made her pause. A deep breath and a tap on the screen brought her back into a world she had left behind. There it was, his name and the familiar photos. The picture-perfect family. He had moved on, but so had she. However, what happened next was far from ordinary. There, in the middle of the article, was something that caught her attention. A small mention of a recent partnership announcement with her ex-husband's company, her own design firm, the one she had built from scratch and never told him about. How had he even known about her work? The curiosity took hold of her, the pull of unfinished business she had tried to bury all these years. She couldn't resist. It wasn't just the business. It was more than that. It was the fact that she had something now, something he could never take from her. Independence, success, and a life built from the rubble of his betrayal. She hadn't expected it to happen like this. But the moment she walked into his boardroom 9 years later, she was ready. It was a Monday, and he had no idea that she would be there. She stood in the doorway for a moment, the sounds of conversation stopping abruptly as everyone turned to look at her. Her presence in that room was undeniable. There, in front of her ex-husband's shocked face, stood a woman who had become everything he had never thought she could be. Her children, twins, each holding her hand, watched him with quiet curiosity. They were the result of her strength, her survival. They were proof that she had moved on, and she had done so without him. Her ex-husband stood frozen, his face pale, unsure of what was happening. His eyes flicked nervously to his colleagues, then back to her. He had always been in control. He had always made the decisions. But today, the tables had turned. The man who had walked away from his family to start anew with the nanny, he was now the one on the receiving end of a cold, calculated power shift. She wasn't there for his approval, nor did she need his validation. She had come for something far more important: justice and closure. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, trying to regain his composure. He had always been a man of business, a man who prided himself on his cool demeanor. But there was something about seeing her again after so long, seeing her not broken, not a victim, but a force to be reckoned with, that rattled him. "I'm here for what's mine," she replied, her voice calm, steady. She wasn't there to argue or to cry. She was there to claim her place in the world she had built, the world he had abandoned her from. The room fell silent, and for a moment all he could do was stare at her. The years of denial, the excuses, the lies he had told himself, it was all unraveling. She had come back not just to confront him, but to show him that she had survived, thrived, and built something beautiful without him. And now he had no control over her anymore. He never would again. The conversation shifted, and his voice took on a defensive tone. "This is not the place for this," he said, glancing nervously at his colleagues, who were now just as uncomfortable as he was. But she wasn't backing down. This wasn't about the business or the partnership he had arranged for her design firm. This was about her reclaiming the life he had taken from her. "You didn't just leave me, did you?" she asked, her gaze sharp. "You destroyed everything we built together for her, for the nanny. You thought I would never survive, never rebuild. But here I am." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. She continued, not waiting for him to find his words. "You left me to take care of the kids alone with nothing but a broken heart and shattered dreams. And now, look at me. You think you can buy me back? You think this is about money? It's not. It's about me walking into your life today after everything you did to me and standing tall in your boardroom with your children by my side." Her words hit him like a slap in the face, and for a moment he was speechless. His mind raced, trying to come up with an excuse, something to say that could take back what he had done. But he knew, deep down, it was too late for that. The years of neglect, betrayal, and lies had led to this moment, and there was no going back. The twins, her beautiful children, remained silent, as though they knew the importance of the moment. They were no longer children at the mercy of his decisions. They were witnesses to the final act in a story that had started so long ago, when their father had made his choice. Her ex-husband's face twisted as his mind raced. He glanced at the twins, his blood, and then back at her. A mix of guilt, anger, and disbelief clouded his expression. He had never imagined that she would come back to him, not like this. Not with the confidence, the strength, and the undeniable sense of success that she now radiated. He had always seen her as the one who would eventually fall apart without him. He never thought she'd be capable of standing in front of him, taking control of the very life he had abandoned. It was supposed to be easy for him. She would crumble. She would need him. She would beg for his forgiveness. But instead she was here, walking into his world as if she belonged. As if the years of pain, betrayal, and abandonment meant nothing to her. The moment hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. He couldn't look away from her, her posture, her calmness. She was not the woman who had once cried on the bathroom floor, desperately trying to save their marriage. She was someone else entirely, someone he had failed to recognize. I didn't think you'd ever come back," he finally managed, his voice shaky. "I thought you would just let it go, move on." His words trailed off, weak and hollow, like he was trying to justify his actions or somehow make them sound better than they were. But she didn't need his justification, not anymore. "I've moved on, yes," she replied, her voice clear and unwavering. "But you didn't just leave me, did you? You didn't just leave your wife. You left your children, you left your family, and you left me to face everything alone." She paused, her gaze never faltering. "But I didn't need you then, and I certainly don't need you now." Her words cut deeper than anything he had ever heard from her. It was the final nail in the coffin of his perceived control. She had endured so much for the last 9 years, all while he built his empire. But what he hadn't known was that her empire, her success, her life, had been quietly taking shape, without his presence, without his support, and without his constant manipulation. His mind struggled to process everything. The children, his children, were a reminder of everything he had given up, and now they stood with her, with a woman who had become everything he could never have imagined. His chest tightened, a strange mix of jealousy and shame washing over him. He had done this. He had chosen the nanny over his family, over his wife, and now here she was standing before him, showing him exactly what he had lost. "You think I don't regret it?" His voice was low, almost pleading, as though trying to bring back a shred of sympathy. "You think I haven't thought about what we had? About what I left behind?" She looked at him, not with anger, but with an undeniable calmness that seemed to shake him to his core. "Regret isn't enough? You've never once acknowledged what you've done to me, to us. The life you abandoned wasn't just a house or a business or a marriage, it was a family, and no amount of regret is going to bring that back." His face flushed with a mixture of anger and guilt, but she held her ground. There was nothing he could say to undo the damage he had caused. "I've made a life for myself, and for them," she continued, nodding toward the twins, who now stood beside her with their heads held high. "And while you've been busy with your empire, I've been busy building my own, one that doesn't need you to survive, one that doesn't need your approval." There was a long pause as the weight of her words settled in the room. He knew deep down she was right. Every decision he had made, every betrayal, every lie, it had all led to this moment. He had chosen the nanny, chosen his business, and chosen his own ego over the family that had once been his world. And now his world was crumbling. The tension in the room was palpable. His colleagues, who had been awkwardly silent until now, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had no idea who this woman was, no understanding of what was happening. But they could feel it. The air had shifted, and the power dynamic had flipped. She wasn't just here to confront him. She was here to show him and everyone in that room that she had moved on. She had built a life that was not just surviving, it was thriving. And she would never go back to the woman she had been, the one who had waited for him to come back, the one who believed in the lie that they could make it work. Her ex-husband opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had no defense, no argument. He had already lost. "This isn't about us," she said, her voice now low but firm. "This is about something much bigger. This is about taking control back. You thought you could take everything from me and still have the upper hand. But look at me now. Look at us now." She gestured to the twins beside her. "We are exactly where we need to be." She turned to leave, but before she did, she cast one final glance at him, a look that held no anger, no malice, just cold, unflinching certainty. "I'm done being the person you left behind. I'm not that woman anymore." And with that she walked out, leaving him to face the truth of what he had done. As the door closed behind her, he stood there, motionless, the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. It was the first time in 9 years that he truly felt the consequences of his actions, and in that moment he realized just how much he had lost. Her ex-husband stood frozen in the boardroom, his mind struggling to keep up with the whirlwind of emotions and realizations crashing down on him. The room Once a place where he felt invincible, now felt suffocating. He had never imagined she would come back into his life like this, strong, confident, and successful. For years he had convinced himself that she would be lost without him, that she would need him to survive, to rebuild. But today, in front of him, was proof of his own arrogance and misjudgment. She didn't need him. She had built something without him, something he could never take away. The silence in the room was deafening. The board members, once captivated by his charm and the power he held over his life, now shifted uneasily in their seats. They had no idea what had just unfolded, but they could sense the change in the atmosphere. The sharp tension that had filled the room moments ago now hung thick, like a storm ready to break. He could still hear her words echoing in his mind. "I'm done being the person you left behind." She had been so sure, so final. There was no room for debate, no space left for manipulation. Her resolve was like a wall, and there was nothing he could do to break it down. His gaze shifted to the twins, who stood just a few feet away from him, looking at him with cool, unblinking eyes. They were his children, but in that moment they didn't feel like it. They felt like strangers, children of a woman he had betrayed, children who had never asked for any of this. They were part of the life he had walked away from, part of the family he had abandoned. And now they were here, standing in a place he had never expected them to be, in front of him, with their mother, showing him that he had no power over them anymore. He couldn't help but wonder what they thought of him. Did they know? Did they understand why he had left them? He tried to remember the last time he had seen them before everything fell apart. The memory was hazy, clouded by years of guilt and regret. He had missed so much, and now it seemed like too much time had passed for any of it to be repaired. His heart ached as he thought about the moments he had lost. First steps, school plays, birthdays. All of it was gone, all of it had been taken from him when he had walked away for the nanny. He glanced back at the door through which she had just walked, her presence still lingering in the air. He had thought he could build an empire and leave her behind, but what he had failed to realize was that she had built her own empire in his absence, one where he had no place. The weight of everything he had done hit him all at once. The lies, the betrayal, the neglect. It was all coming back to him. He had convinced himself for so long that what he did was justified, that he deserved happiness, that he had done nothing wrong. But now, standing there in his boardroom, the truth was undeniable. He had chosen the nanny, and in doing so, he had destroyed his family. The guilt of that decision washed over him in waves, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do with it. As he sat down at his desk, trying to steady his racing thoughts, his phone buzzed, pulling him back into reality. It was a message from Vanessa, the nanny, the woman he had left his family for. A part of him didn't want to read it, didn't want to face the consequences of his choices, but another part of him was desperate for something familiar, something that might make him feel better. He opened the message. "We need to talk," it read. "I'm worried about what's happening. Is everything okay?" A hollow laugh escaped him. Everything was far from okay. His business, his life, everything he had worked for was starting to crumble, all because of the decisions he had made years ago. And now Vanessa was part of it too. He had left his wife, his children, for her, and yet she was now questioning him. What did that say about his choices? What did that say about their future? He felt a pang of anger, but it wasn't directed at Vanessa. It was at himself. How had he let it get to this point? How had he allowed the woman he had once loved to slip through his fingers and then, to make matters worse, abandoned his children to chase after a fleeting hollow happiness? He set his phone down, staring at it for a moment, as if hoping it would give him some answers. But there were no easy answers, no quick fixes. The truth had come crashing down on him, and now he was left to face it alone. The walls of his carefully constructed world had begun to collapse, and all he could do was watch. He looked around the boardroom, his eyes landing on the faces of the people who had once admired him. They were watching him now, but there was no admiration in their eyes, just curiosity and pity. They knew in that moment that something had changed. And it wasn't just his ex-wife's return, it was the realization that he had lost everything that truly mattered. He had let his obsession with success, with power, blind him to what was important, his family, his children, and the woman who had once stood by his side. And now, in the cold silence of the room, he knew there was no going back. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. But the weight of the realization was crushing. It wasn't just his career that was at risk. It was his legacy, his relationships, and the life he had so carelessly discarded. And there was no one to blame but himself. He slumped in his chair, the weight of it all too much to bear. He had everything he thought he wanted, power, wealth, success, but in the end, he had nothing, not anymore. The empire he had built was hollow, and he was the one who had torn it apart. The room felt colder now, emptier, and as the door to his office clicked shut behind him, he was left with nothing but the echo of his own mistakes and the sinking realization that it was too late to fix any of it. As she walked out of the boardroom, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. The confrontation with her ex-husband, though emotionally charged and difficult, had given her a sense of closure she never thought she'd find. She had walked in, expecting to feel the familiar sting of humiliation, but instead she had held her ground. She had stood tall, and for the first time, he was the one who was vulnerable, not her. She had reclaimed her power in that room, and with it, a sense of pride that had eluded her for too long. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from a deep sense of accomplishment. It had been 9 years since she had walked away from that marriage, but today she had returned, not as the broken woman she once was, but as a force to be reckoned with. Her ex-husband had been expecting to see someone who had withered without him, someone who needed his approval. But that wasn't who she was anymore. She had survived, she had thrived. And now, with her twins by her side, she was finally in control of her own destiny. As she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed again. She hesitated for a moment before answering. It was a message from her lawyer, Rebecca, who had been guiding her through the legal aspects of her journey. "We have news," the message read. "The search warrants were executed at your ex-husband's house and office. We have everything we need." She couldn't help but smile. This was it. The beginning of the end for the man who had thought he could get away with destroying her life. She had walked into that boardroom to face him, but it wasn't just about confronting him. It was about taking back what was rightfully hers, her dignity, her business, and most importantly, her peace. She had fought for so long to reclaim her life, and now it was finally happening. As the elevator doors closed and the building's hum faded behind her, she took a deep breath. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. The legal battles, the media scrutiny, and the emotional toll. It would all come in time. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had spent too many years living in fear, in the shadow of his actions. Today she had stepped into the light, and there was no turning back now. She thought about the twins, their small hands holding hers just moments ago. They had been her strength throughout all of this. They were the reason she had fought so hard to rebuild. She had promised herself she would never let them see the pain of their father's betrayal, never let them feel abandoned as she had. And now they would grow up knowing that no matter what life threw at them, they could survive anything. She would make sure of that. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Adrian. She didn't hesitate to answer. He had been there from the very beginning, quietly supporting her in ways she hadn't even realized until now. He was no longer just her college ex-boyfriend. He was her ally, her protector, the one who had watched over her even when she didn't know he was watching. "Hey," she said, her voice a little shaky but filled with determination. "It's done. I confronted him. Adrian's voice was calm but laced with pride. I knew you could do it. She paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. It wasn't just about confronting her ex-husband. It was about everything that had led to this moment, the years of pain, the loneliness, the doubt. Adrian had seen her at her lowest, and now he was seeing her at her strongest. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what the future held. She was ready to face it, whatever it was. "I'm on my way to the car now," she continued, her voice steady. "We've got everything. It's time to finish this." "Good," Adrian replied. "I'll be waiting for you. You don't have to do this alone." She smiled at the thought of him standing by her through all of this. There was something comforting about his presence, even if it was just a phone call away. He wasn't just a reminder of her past. He was part of her future now. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew she wouldn't be walking it alone. As she exited the building, her mind began to race with the possibilities. What would happen next? Would her ex-husband fight back? Would the media get involved? There were so many questions, but for once, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt in control. She had everything she needed to take him down, not just the legal evidence, but the strength to see it through. The twins were waiting for her in the car. She could already imagine their smiles when she walked through the door. This was for them, for their future. They deserved to grow up knowing that their mother was strong, that she had fought for them, and that she had never given up, even when everything seemed lost. She took a deep breath and looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of the moment. It was the first day of the rest of her life, and this time it was on her terms. As she sat in the back seat of the car with her twins, her heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the exhilaration of finally being free from the chains of her past. She glanced over at them, her two little ones, so full of life, so full of hope. They had no idea what their mother had been through, the years of pain, the struggles, but they would never know that side of her. They would know the strong, resilient woman who had fought for them and won. The car ride felt surreal, like she was leaving one chapter of her life behind and stepping into a new, uncharted one. She had just taken down the man who had once been everything to her, the man who had shattered her world. And now, with every mile that passed, she felt herself becoming more and more untethered from that past. She wasn't the same person who had sat in a cold, dark room crying, wondering what she had done wrong. No, she had reclaimed herself, and it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. But even as she felt the rush of victory, a small part of her couldn't help but feel the sting of what had been lost. Her ex-husband, no matter how wrong he had been, was still their father. No matter how much he had betrayed her, their connection to him could never be erased. She could feel the tension between her desire to protect her children from his toxic influence and the reality that they would have to face him one day. She knew that no matter how much she had achieved, this battle wasn't truly over. There would be fallout. There would be consequences. And her children, though still so young, would have to live with it too. Her phone buzzed again, and she quickly glanced down at the screen. It was a message from Rebecca, her lawyer. "We've secured the documents from the office. There's enough here to move forward with the case. We'll meet tomorrow to go over the next steps." She couldn't stop herself from smiling. It was all coming together. The battle was no longer about confronting her ex-husband or confronting the past. It was about making sure he paid for what he had done. It was about ensuring her children had a future that wasn't tainted by his actions, that they would never feel the way she had, helpless, abandoned, unworthy. But there was more to do. She needed to make sure the evidence she had was enough. She needed to gather more than what they had already secured. The thought of going to court, of facing him in a legal battle, made her stomach churn. It wasn't just the courtrooms and the public spotlight that scared her. It was the idea of seeing him again, of having to face the man who had destroyed everything she held dear. but she knew she couldn't shy away from it. She had to do this, not just for herself, but for her children, for the life they deserved. As the car pulled up to her house, she felt a pang of nostalgia. It had been her home once, filled with laughter, love, and warmth. But now it was just a reminder of what had been lost. She had rebuilt so much of her life, but there were still remnants of the past here, remnants that she couldn't erase so easily. The twins, sensing the change in their mother's mood, reached over and grabbed her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it made her heart swell with love. She had done this for them. Every decision she had made, every painful step she had taken, had been for them. They were her reason for surviving, her reason for fighting. And no matter what came next, they would never feel abandoned the way she had. As she opened the door to her house, she let out a deep breath. The familiar scent of home washed over her, but it felt different now, less like a place of refuge and more like a place she was ready to leave behind. It was time to move forward, to step away from everything that had held her back. There was no turning back now. She gathered the twins in her arms, kissing their foreheads gently. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, mostly to herself but also to them. "Everything is going to be just fine." But she knew the hardest part was yet to come. She would have to face him again, this time in the courtroom. She would have to sit across from the man who had once been the love of her life and make him understand that she had nothing left to lose. But it wouldn't be about revenge. No, it would be about justice. It would be about making sure that he never got to hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her. As the twins settled in for the night, she sat at her kitchen table, going over the documents again, trying to make sense of everything. There was still so much to do, so much she needed to prepare for. But she was ready. She wasn't the same woman who had been abandoned in the woods all those years ago. She wasn't the same woman who had cried herself to sleep, wondering why her husband had chosen someone else. No, she was someone different now, stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. It was Adrian. She answered it quickly, feeling a sense of comfort wash over her just hearing his voice. "You did it," he said, his tone filled with pride. "I'm proud of you." She smiled, leaning back in her chair, the weight of the day settling in. "I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You don't have to thank me," Adrian said softly. "I'm just glad I could be there for you, just like I promised." As she looked around the house, she realized just how far she had come. This wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was hers, and it was a life she had fought for. And as long as she had her children and the strength to fight, nothing, no one, could take that away from her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, she was ready to face it. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and constant planning. As much as she had wanted to relax, to breathe, and savor her victory, she knew the real work had just begun. Her ex-husband hadn't made his move yet, but she knew he was going to fight back. People like him didn't just let go of their power so easily. He would try to twist the narrative, use his wealth and influence to control the situation. But she was ready. This time, there was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. She spent her evenings going over the case with Rebecca and Adrian, carefully going through every piece of evidence they had gathered. There were the financial documents, the text messages, the bank statements. Everything pointed to the same truth. Her ex-husband had systematically tried to destroy her. But now it was her turn to make sure he paid for what he had done. The twins were starting to understand in their own way what was happening. They asked questions, their innocent curiosity always catching her off guard. "Why did Daddy leave us, Mom?" her son asked one night, his wide eyes filled with a mix of confusion and concern. She had been waiting for this moment, preparing herself for the inevitable. Taking a deep breath, she knelt down to his level, keeping her voice steady. "Sometimes people make mistakes," she said, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "And when they do, it hurts the people they love. But you and your sister are never going to be hurt by him again. You're with me now, and I'm going to protect you both with everything I have." Her son didn't fully understand, of course. He was still too young to grasp the complexities of what had happened. But there was comfort in the way she spoke, a confidence that reassured him. She wasn't just comforting him, she was also reassuring herself. She had to be strong for them. She had to make sure they grew up in a world where they never doubted their worth, where they knew that no matter what anyone else did, they were loved. Each day the tension built. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. Her ex-husband hadn't made any public moves yet, but his silence was more ominous than anything else. It was as if he was plotting, trying to find a way to turn everything around. He would fight dirty, she knew that much. But she had something he didn't, the truth, and she had no intention of backing down. On the fourth day after the boardroom confrontation, she got the call. It was from Detective Morales, the officer they had been working with, who had helped them secure the evidence against her ex-husband. "I've just spoken with your ex-husband's lawyer," Morales said, her tone clipped but professional. "He's ready to settle, but it's clear they want to keep this quiet. They want to avoid a public trial. He's willing to offer a significant financial settlement in exchange for you dropping the charges." Her heart pounded in her chest. She had been expecting something like this. He was trying to buy her silence, to sweep everything under the rug. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "And what did you tell him?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "I told him to go to hell," Morales replied without hesitation. "This isn't just about money, and it's not just about your ex-husband's reputation. It's about justice, and we're not letting him walk away without paying for what he did. Not this time." A surge of pride washed over her. She had expected to feel tempted by the offer. After all, the money would provide security for her children, a future without financial worries. But as soon as the words left Morales's mouth, she knew there was no amount of money that could make up for what had been taken from her. This wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about making sure he never hurt anyone else again. "Good," she said, her voice unwavering. "We go to court. We do this the right way." The decision had been made. She wasn't going to settle for anything less than the justice she deserved. She wasn't going to let him win again. And though the thought of a public trial, the media attention, and the constant scrutiny weighed heavily on her, she knew it was the right choice. As she hung up the phone, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. This was the moment she had been working toward. This was the battle she had been preparing for. Her life had been turned upside down for so long, and now she was finally taking control. The next few weeks were a blur of courtroom preparations, legal meetings, and endless paperwork. But through it all, one thing remained constant. She was not alone. Adrian was by her side, offering quiet support when she needed it most, listening when she needed to vent, and providing strength when she felt like she couldn't go on. He had never asked for anything in return, never expected anything from her. And in the midst of all this chaos, that unwavering support meant everything. There were moments, though, when doubt crept in. As much as she knew she was doing the right thing, there were still nights when the weight of it all threatened to pull her under. The thought of facing her ex-husband in a public trial, the thought of him sitting across from her in court, made her stomach turn. Would she be able to do it? Would she be able to look him in the eye and confront him for everything he had done? But every time that doubt threatened to overwhelm her, she thought about the twins. She thought about the future she was building for them, and the life they would have, one that was free from their father's manipulation, free from the toxic web he had spun around them. She thought about the strength she had found in herself over the years, the woman who had built a life from the ashes of her past. She was ready. And when the day of the trial finally arrived, she knew she would walk into that courtroom with her head held high, her heart strong, and her truth clear. There was no turning back now. The day of the trial arrived, and with it, a tension in the air that seemed almost unbearable. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, carefully reviewing every detail, every piece of evidence, and every word she planned to say. But as she stood in front of the courthouse, her heart beat faster than ever before. She had fought so hard to get here, but now that the moment had come, she felt a deep knot of anxiety in her stomach. This was the final step, the final confrontation with the man who had taken so much from her. The twins were safely with Adrian for the day. She knew it was the right decision. They didn't need to be here, not today. They had already been through so much. And this wasn't a place for children. This was her fight now, her battle. And she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. As she entered the courthouse, she was met with the usual rush of emotions, nervousness, fear, determination. She had spent years questioning herself, doubting her worth, wondering if she could make it through the hardest parts of her life. But now, as she walked down the hallway, she felt a sense of clarity. She was ready. This wasn't just about confronting her ex-husband. This was about taking back her power, about proving to herself and to the world that she had survived, and she would keep surviving. Her lawyer, Rebecca, was waiting for her in the courtroom, her expression calm but focused. She had been there every step of the way, guiding her through the maze of legal challenges and reassuring her when she began to doubt herself. Adrian, too, had been a constant presence, offering support and helping her stay grounded. She could feel the weight of their faith in her, and it gave her the strength to keep going. As they took their seats, the reality of the situation set in. The court was filled with people, lawyers, witnesses, even a few reporters, who were there to witness the showdown between her and her ex-husband. The tension in the room was palpable, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. She had a job to do, and she wasn't going to let anyone or anything distract her from that goal. Her ex-husband entered the room shortly after, flanked by his high-priced lawyers. He looked just as he always did, perfectly put together, confident, even smug. But there was something different about him today. His eyes flicked nervously to her, and for a brief moment she saw something that had never been there before. Doubt. He knew what was coming. He knew the truth was on her side, and there was no escaping it. She glanced over at Rebecca, who gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got this," she whispered. It was all the encouragement she needed. With a steady breath, she turned her attention back to the front of the room, where the judge was now taking her seat. The proceedings began, and her ex-husband's lawyer stood first, launching into their defense. They tried to paint her as an emotional woman, someone whose bitterness had clouded her judgment. They twisted the narrative, trying to make it sound like she had been the one who had failed, that she was simply trying to punish him for moving on. It was the same story he had told for years, the same lies he had spread to justify his actions. But every word they said only made her more determined. She had been through this before. She had heard these excuses, these false accusations. She wasn't going to let them work again. This time, the truth was going to come out. She would make sure of it. Then it was her turn. As she stood up to speak, she could feel the eyes of the room on her. For a moment, she wondered if she could do it, if she could find the strength to speak her truth, to finally say the words she had kept hidden for so long. But as soon as she looked out at the faces of the people in the room, she felt something shift. She wasn't speaking to them. She wasn't even speaking to her ex-husband. She was speaking to herself, to the woman she had become. She took a deep breath and began. "I never imagined I would be here today," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I never imagined that after all these years I would be forced to face the man who left me, who abandoned me, not just emotionally, but physically. I never thought that after everything he put me through, I would have to fight for what was rightfully mine." Her ex-husband shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but she didn't look at him. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about her. "I spent so many years believing that I was the one at fault," she continued, "that somehow I wasn't enough, that I wasn't strong enough to hold my family together. But the truth is, I was the one left to pick up the pieces after he walked away. I was the one who had to face the reality that the man I loved no longer cared about me or our children. And through it all, I had to rebuild, not just my life, but my dignity. And in doing so, I learned that I don't need him. I never needed him. Her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed forward. I don't want his money. I don't want his apology. I want justice. Because no one should be allowed to walk away from the destruction they've caused, to leave behind a family for their own selfish desires. I'm here today not just for me, but for my children, for the future that he tried to steal from us, and I'm not leaving until I've fought for it. She paused, letting her words settle in the room. She could feel the shift, the quiet acknowledgement that her ex-husband's defense was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. The truth was stronger than any lie he could tell. When she finished, the courtroom was silent for a long moment. She took her seat, her chest tight, but her heart stronger than ever. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. And she knew deep down that no matter what happened next, she had already won. She had reclaimed her life, her power, and most importantly, her voice. Her ex-husband's lawyer stood up next, trying to rebut her testimony, but the cracks were already showing. The judge listened carefully, clearly weighing the evidence. Her ex-husband's confident demeanor was starting to falter. For the first time, he was on the back foot. It wasn't just her testimony anymore, it was the mountain of evidence they had gathered, the truth that was undeniable. As the day dragged on, the momentum shifted more and more in her favor. Her ex-husband's defenses began to unravel. He was starting to realize that the game he had played for years was over, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. This was her moment. By the end of the day, the tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable. She could feel the weight of everything that had happened in the past months pressing down on her. She had faced her fears, spoken her truth, and now it was up to the judge. The closing statements were made, each side giving their final arguments. Her ex-husband's lawyer tried one last time to paint her as a vindictive ex-wife who was trying to tear down everything he had built. But it felt hollow. The truth had already been laid bare. Her ex-husband, though still trying to maintain a veneer of calm, was visibly shaken. His confident posture from earlier in the day had disappeared. He was slumped, his face pale, as he listened to the statements against him. He had been the one who had thought he could control everything, who had thought he could simply move on and leave her in the dust. But the reality was far different. She had shown him that she was stronger than he ever imagined. As the judge prepared to give his verdict, she felt the weight of the past 9 years finally lifting from her shoulders. She had done it. She had fought with everything she had, and had not backed down. She had come here to reclaim her life, and she was about to get it. Her heart was pounding in her chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. The judge stood, his eyes scanning the room as everyone went silent. "I've reviewed the evidence, listened to both sides, and I've seen the pattern of behavior," the judge began, his voice calm but firm. "The emotional and financial abuse that took place in this case is undeniable. The defendant not only betrayed his family, but has failed to take responsibility for his actions. This court will not stand for that." Her ex-husband's lawyer tried to protest, but the judge silenced him with a sharp look. The room was still, every person holding their breath as the decision was made. "I am granting full custody of the children to the plaintiff, with supervised visitation for the defendant," the judge continued. "Additionally, the defendant will be responsible for compensating the plaintiff for financial damages caused by his actions, including the loss of business income, medical costs, and emotional distress." The words felt like a weight being lifted from her chest. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was personal. It was validation for everything she had gone through. It was the justice she had fought for, the closure she had needed. Her ex-husband had been held accountable, and the court had recognized the impact his actions had on their family. The moment the gavel came down, sealing the verdict, she felt a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. She thought she would feel relief or triumph, but what she felt was peace. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. The battle was over, and she had won. As she walked out of the courtroom, her heart lighter than it had been in years, she looked over at Adrian, who had been with her every step of the way. His presence was a comfort, more than just a reminder of their past, but a symbol of the strength they had found together. "We did it," she whispered to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "We did," Adrian replied, his voice steady, but she could see the pride in his eyes. He had stood by her, never asking for anything, never expecting anything in return. He had helped her become the woman she was today. He was part of her victory. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over everything. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the years she had spent in the shadows, hiding from her past, holding on to the pain. But now she was free. Free from the man who had destroyed her, and free from the version of herself she had been forced to become. She had found herself again, and nothing could take that away. The media frenzy that followed the trial was something she had prepared for, but never quite expected. Her ex-husband's lawyers had tried to control the narrative, but the truth was too powerful. As the story spread, the headlines reflected the reality she had faced. "Abandoned by her husband, she fights for justice," was a headline that made her stomach turn. She had never wanted to be a symbol, but she knew now that her story had resonated with so many people, especially women who had suffered in silence, who had been discarded and forgotten by the people they trusted most. She wasn't naive enough to think everything would be easy from here on out. The press, the attention, the constant reminders of her past would be difficult to navigate. But as she sat in her living room, watching a news segment about the trial, she realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. The judgment had been made, and her life was hers to live. She could choose how to move forward, and she wasn't going to let anyone dictate her future. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Rebecca, the lawyer who had been by her side throughout the entire ordeal. "Congratulations," Rebecca said warmly. "The verdict was exactly what we were hoping for. Your ex-husband is going to be held accountable for his actions. And the twins, they'll be safe." Her heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You did the hard work," Rebecca said, with a smile in her voice. "You found the strength to face him, and now you've given your children a future that's free from his control. That's all you. I'm just glad I could help." She hung up the phone and looked over at the twins, who were playing in the next room. They had no idea what had just transpired in the courtroom. They were too young to understand the significance of it all, but in time, they would. They would grow up knowing that their mother had fought for them, that she had given everything to protect them, to make sure they would never feel the way she had felt. She had done it for them, and now she would give them the life they deserved. As the days passed, things started to settle. The press died down, and the noise from the outside world faded into the background. She didn't need the world to see her as a hero or a victim. She knew who she was now. She was a mother, a survivor, a woman who had faced unimaginable pain and had come out stronger on the other side. One evening, as she tucked the twins into bed, she kissed them on their foreheads and whispered softly, "I love you both so much." They smiled sleepily up at her, their small hands reaching out for one last hug before they fell asleep. In that moment, she realized that this was what she had been fighting for all along, not the money, not the court case, not even the closure, but them, her children. They were her reason for everything, her strength, her future. And as she turned off the lights and stepped out of their room, she knew that no matter what came next, she would always fight for them, just as she had fought for herself. The past was behind her, and the future was wide open. Life after the trial felt different, but it wasn't the weightlessness she had imagined. There was peace, yes, but it was tempered by the reality that her life would never be the same. Every day she was reminded of the battles she had fought and the scars she would always carry. But those scars no longer defined her. They were a part of her story, a testament to her resilience. And for the first time in a long while, she was okay with that. She and Adrian remained close, their bond growing stronger each day. What had started as a shared history between them had transformed into a deep, unspoken understanding. He had been her rock through everything. She had come to rely on him in ways she hadn't expected, and though she wasn't ready to label their relationship, there was a comfort in knowing that they had both found something in each other. But more than anything, she knew that the future wasn't defined by her past, by her ex-husband, or by anyone else's expectations. It was her own to shape. She had learned that the only person who could control her life now was her, and that, above all else, was the greatest victory of all. As the twins grew, so did the understanding of their past. She made sure they knew they were loved, that they were not the product of someone else's mistakes, but the bright future she had created for them. For the first time in years, she looked ahead with hope. Hope for herself, hope for her children, and the knowledge that no matter what came next, she had already won. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm. The weight of the trial and all the turmoil that had come with it slowly started to fade into the background, replaced by the simple joys of everyday life. The twins were growing up fast, their laughter filling the house, their little footsteps echoing in the hallways. It was everything she had dreamed of when she had first fought to get here, the sense of normalcy, the peace she had longed for. But there were still moments when she thought about the past, the pain, the betrayal, the years of doubt, and it made her pause. The scars were still there, etched deep into her heart. She hadn't forgotten what had happened, but she had learned to live with it. She had learned to not let it control her anymore. She had spent so many years questioning herself, wondering if she was enough, if she could ever truly be happy again. But now, when she looked in the mirror, she saw someone entirely different. She saw a woman who had fought for her life, for her children, and for her peace. She saw strength. She saw resilience. She saw a future that was her own, one that she could build without fear of being held back by anyone or anything. And as she watched her twins playing in the backyard one afternoon, she realized just how far she had come. This was the life she had fought for, the life they all deserved. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was theirs. And as for her ex-husband, he had tried to make his mark on her life, to tear everything down. But in the end, he was nothing more than a distant memory, a chapter in her story that had already been closed. She didn't need his apology, his acknowledgement, or his validation. She had everything she needed right here with her children, with the life she had built. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the backyard, she sat on the porch with a glass of wine in hand, her eyes fixed on the horizon. It was one of those rare moments when she allowed herself to simply be still, to appreciate the peace that had become her new normal. For so long, she had been consumed by anger, by hurt, by the need for justice. But now she realized that peace was the true victory. She thought about everything she had been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the courtroom battles, and she realized that she had finally forgiven herself. It wasn't easy. It took time, but she had learned to stop blaming herself for the things that were beyond her control. She had done everything she could to save her family, to hold on to a life that had been torn apart. And now it was time to let go of the guilt, the self-doubt. She had done her best, and that was enough. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Adrian. "I was thinking about our conversation the other day," he wrote. "You've come so far, and I'm proud of you, always have been." She smiled softly, her heart swelling with warmth. Adrian had always been there for her, quietly supporting her, even when she didn't realize she needed it. He had been a constant in her life when everything else seemed to crumble. She wasn't sure where their relationship would go, but she was starting to realize that maybe it didn't need to go anywhere at all. Maybe just knowing that they had each other was enough. She tapped out a quick reply. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you." She paused before sending it, then added, "I think I'm finally okay." When she pressed send, she felt a sense of finality. It wasn't just a message to him, it was a declaration to herself. She was okay. She was more than okay. She had built something beautiful out of the wreckage. She had found herself again, and no matter what the future held, she knew that she could face it with the strength she had discovered within herself. The following years were filled with quiet contentment. The twins grew older, and with each passing day, they reminded her of everything she had fought for. Their smiles, their innocence, their unwavering trust in her. All of it was a reflection of her strength, of the woman she had become. She watched them learn and grow, their laughter filling the house, and she knew deep down that no matter what came next, they would always be okay. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The battle had been fought and won. And while the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer had the power to define her. She had come out on the other side, not just surviving, but thriving. Her relationship with Adrian had remained strong, though it had evolved in ways neither of them had expected. They had become something more than just friends, more than just allies in a battle. They had become family. And though they never put a label on it, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were there for each other through the good and the bad. And that was enough. She no longer feared the future, she no longer feared the unknown, because she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had already faced the worst. She had already survived the unimaginable. And now she was ready to live her life, truly and fully. For the first time in years, the past was behind her, and the future was hers to create. And for the first time, she felt a quiet peace. The kind of peace that came with knowing that she had done the hard work, had fought the battles, and had emerged victorious, not just in the eyes of the law, but in her own heart. She was free, and that was enough. Years passed, and life unfolded in ways she had never expected. The world kept turning, but for her, everything had changed. She had built a future for herself and her children, a future that was rooted in strength, in resilience, and in love. The scars of her past no longer defined her. They were just part of the journey, a journey that had led her to this point, to the life she had fought for, to the family she had always dreamed of. Her children were thriving. They were growing into compassionate, intelligent, and strong individuals, each one a reflection of the woman who had raised them. She had made sure they never felt the weight of her past mistakes. They knew they were loved, they knew they were valued, and most importantly, they knew that no matter what happened, their mother would always fight for them, just as she had fought for herself. She spent her days focusing on her business, watching it grow, reaching new heights she had never thought possible. She had turned the pain, the anger, the betrayal into something that fueled her, something that pushed her forward. She had created a legacy, one that was not defined by the man who had walked away, but by her own blood, sweat, and tears. Adrian had remained a constant in her life, always there, always supportive. They had grown closer, their bond strengthening with each passing year. There were moments when they both wondered if their relationship would evolve into something more, but neither of them rushed it. They understood each other in a way that no one else could, and that was enough. It was a connection built on mutual respect, trust, and shared experiences. It was a connection that had withstood the test of time. And as she looked back on the journey, on everything she had been through, she realized that it had all led her here, to this moment of peace. She had overcome the darkest chapters of her life and had come out on the other side stronger than she had ever imagined. She had found herself again. She had found her worth. There was no more looking over her shoulder, no more wondering if she was enough. She was enough. And in this moment, with her children beside her, with Adrian at her side, she knew that she had everything she needed to face the future. One evening, as she sat by the fire with Adrian, their laughter echoing through the room, she looked at him and smiled. There were no grand declarations, no moments of profound realization, but there was something about the way he looked at her, the way they had built their own little world together, that spoke volumes. "I think we've come a long way," she said softly, her voice tinged with contentment. "We have," he agreed, his smile warm. "But you've come the farthest. You've built something from nothing. You've created a life that's yours, and I'm proud of you." She smiled at the sincerity in his words. "I didn't do it alone," she said, her gaze shifting to the children playing nearby. "You've been here for me every step of the way." Adrian's smile softened, and for a moment there was silence between them, comfortable, unspoken understanding. The years had taught her that sometimes the greatest victories weren't the ones that could be measured in awards or recognition. Sometimes the greatest victories were the quiet moments, those small, everyday joys that reminded you of how far you had come. She leaned back, looking out the window at the quiet night. The past had shaped her, but it was no longer in control. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her instincts, and to embrace the life she had created. She had fought for everything she had, and now she could finally rest. The fight was over. The future was wide open, and it was hers to shape. She didn't need to know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't need to have all the answers. All she knew was that she had a family who loved her, a life she had built with her own hands, and the strength to face anything that came her way. In that moment, she was at peace. She was free. And she knew, deep in her soul, that this was just the beginning.